What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we're going to be breaking down the Thanksgiving Day games, talking about the players that I would be starting and sitting across all positions. So we'll get into that in a second, but first, of course, have to start things off as usual, the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was who currently leads all tight ends in receiving touchdowns. The answer is Hunter Henry with 7. Elrish757 was first to get that right on Twitter, and Jacob Wallen was first to get that right on YouTube. Today's stat. What skill player scored the most fantasy points during the Thanksgiving games last year? All right, so Thanksgiving Day games this year. Here's the schedule. It's going to be Bears at Lions. That's going to be 12:30 Eastern. Then we've got Raiders at Cowboys, 4:30 Eastern. Then Bills at Saints, 8:20 Eastern. So one pile of garbage, then two pretty decent games. They could have done better with the schedule. Like, none of these games stand out as like must watches really, but I guess we've got a few good ones after, the pile of garbage that we will start with. So Bears at Lions, not a great game to watch. This game's got a really low 42-point total, as I'm sure you could have guessed. Two very bad offenses, one really bad defense, but when the offenses are this bad, you're going to get a gross game, especially when both teams are totally fine just running the football every single play. We do have Bears as 3-point road favorites. For the Bears, Andy Dalton is expected to draw the start here. Fields doesn't have like a major injury, but he's banged up enough, and the turnaround was too quick that they're just going to hold him out and then probably start him in the following week. I suppose it depends how Dalton plays on Thanksgiving. If he goes out there and plays really well, maybe he can continue being the starter. But the most likely outcome is that he's just fine because he's Dalton. He's not all that fantastic. And then we see Fields the next week. But for this week, we're going to have Dalton as a starter. Not a huge deal. The matchup is the biggest factor here. This might be a big switch if we were facing a bad defense, but like Fields and Dalton were both going to perform pretty well in this matchup. Of course, we've got the Lions ranking 29th in rush defense DVOA, 28th in pass defense DVOA. It doesn't matter a whole lot who the quarterback is. They were going to find success on offense. But, you don't really need me to tell you the Lions defense is bad, right? Everyone knows the Lions defense is bad. So we've got Dave Montgomery, featured running back, 95% snap share out of the bye. It was 85% for the bye. He's a true feature back. He's out there basically every single play. He is a must start in this matchup. In the passing attack, and then no other running back. Like, if you've got a running back getting 95% of the snaps, he's the only one you're starting. So you're starting Montgomery everywhere, no one else. For the passing game, the Bears only had walkthroughs, so we only have practice estimations right now. Obviously, like with the quick turnaround, these teams are not practicing a bunch before these games. They might get one practice in. We're probably going to find out today, so I record this on Wednesday. We're going to find out today if Allen Robinson's playing. I don't think he's going to play. If he wasn't practicing before, he's got this hamstring injury, it's pretty unlikely to throw him out there for like one practice and think he's good to go off the injury. So I personally doubt he plays, but pay attention to this. It doesn't really matter because I'm not playing Robinson regardless. So even if he's active, I would keep him on the bench. You don't know if he's just going to be a decoy. You don't know if he's going to have a high target share. But it seems likely that he wouldn't go out there and just all of a sudden have his breakout game coming off of the injury, right? So I wouldn't play him regardless. It matters a little bit for Mooney. I mean, he's coming off a 16-target game last week, clear alpha. If Robinson's out, you're absolutely playing Darnell Mooney as a wide receiver 2. He's going to be a really strong option. If Robinson does end up playing, I wouldn't consider Mooney a 2 because some of those targets would come away, but I'd consider him a very solid play in the flex and someone that I have Mooney in 2 of 3 leagues. I'd play him in both leagues, right? I don't really care if Allen Robinson's playing. I'm playing Mooney regardless. Again, it's a great matchup. They should find success through the air. They're going to still want to run the ball, still a run first team, but when they throw it, it's Mooney, right? The ball's just going to Mooney. The only other pass catcher you can consider, because you're not starting any of their other wide receivers, the only other pass catcher you're considering is Cole Kmet. But he's really just like a mid to low end 2, not someone you really need to be starting unless you're in like a 14 or 16 team league, then maybe. But even then, like, he's not a fantastic play. It's just really difficult to trust him at all. We have not seen a ceiling. He's got one game over 50 receiving yards, hasn't scored a touchdown yet. Like, you'd just be hoping this happens to be his best game, and I'm not willing to do that, right? So I would keep him on the bench. It's really just Mooney and Montgomery here. Dalton could be a streaming option this week, but again, this is still a run-first team. Even with the good matchup, they want to run the ball over and over and over again, and we know the Lions want to run the ball too, so it's just going to be a gross game. Not many yards, not many touchdowns, and so Montgomery, Mooney, that's really it. I really wouldn't go anywhere else. For the Lions, Swift is operating as a feature back, and I talked, 2-3 months ago about how he's a must-start every single week. I don't care what the matchup is, and this matchup isn't one to fear, so just start Swift. It doesn't matter. Jamal Williams returned last week. That did eat into Swift's workload, but it doesn't matter. You're starting Swift. And you can't start Williams. He doesn't get enough work. He had that one game in week 1 where he had 1 million targets and some carries. But basically, ever since then, he's only getting carries, not getting many targets, and it's not enough workload to trust, especially as a road or a home underdog, I guess. But especially as an underdog, and again, a really low total game, we're not expecting much output here. You'd just be lucky that he happens to be on the field and score a touchdown, and we're not willing to do that. Honestly, Hawkinson's the only other player you can consider starting here. Their quarterbacks can never be trusted. You're never playing them. They have absolute trash at wide receiver. So Hawkinson and Swift, start them in all formats, bench everyone else. There's no other real analysis there needed. Raiders at Cowboys is up next. This game has a 51-point total, and the Cowboys are 7.5-point home favorites. For the Raiders, Josh Jacobs has seen target counts of 4, 5, and 7 over the last 3 weeks, which is good because he's seen carry totals of only 13, 7, and 9. It's a bit different usage than we're used to seeing from him, right? Like typically, he gets a good amount of carries. You can usually rely on him for like a decent workload of carries, but then he's somewhat lacking in the receiving game, not super involved there. And they've lost, recently. They look really bad in offense, but they've lost their last 3, so maybe that has something to do with him getting these targets. But typically when that happens, he just gets completely phased out. So it's nice that he's still getting targets, still being involved when they're down. The problem is the carries aren't coming with it. So he's sacrificing the carries for these targets, and they're not high upside targets, and it's not like he's a target monster, right? If he's only going to get in a trailing game script like 10 or 12 carries and like 4 or 5 targets, that's fine, and that's enough to consider him a running back 2, a low-end running back 2. But again, it's not a good game environment. Dallas isn't a defense we're looking to attack, right? So it's not a fantastic matchup. Road underdog. You're not going to feel great about it. You probably have to, given where you took him in the draft, what other running backs you likely have. But it's only at running back 2. It's not a high upside pick. You're really just hoping he scores a touchdown, and there's not a huge chance that he does score a touchdown. This offense, again, has not looked good. They have not looked good recently, and so you don't want to put too much of an investment in the offense. But again, he's probably going to get around 10 carries, 4 or 5 targets, which is fine. Not great, but it's fine to play as like a low end too. At wide receiver, Hunter Renfrow is really, or I guess Drake, just don't play him, right? Like Kenyon Drake is basically seeing half the workload that Jacobs is. And if I'm talking about Jacobs not being a fantastic play, well, Drake is like half as good of a play. And the thing with Drake is you can be like, oh, well, what if Dallas gets up? Well, no, I just talked about how Jacobs is now seeing targets in those game scripts. And so if they're not just completely moving Jacobs and moving to Drake, now it's like Drake's going to be nothing if they're winning and scoring points. It's all Jacobs on the ground. But even when they get down and trailing script, Drake's not being used all that much. So just bench Drake. And again, at wide receiver, Hunter Renfrow is really your only option. His issue is that he has such little upside, and his projection is like fine. You can play him as like a wide receiver 2 in a full PPR format, but he's never hitting the ceiling. His breakout games are like 7 for 50 and a touchdown. And again, that's fine, but that's like his ceiling, right? His targets are so close to the line of scrimmage that he absolutely has to score a touchdown, and he needs 6-7 receptions, which is still a lot to ask from a player. So I personally think that you're benching him, but again, in a full PPR format, if you want those locked in points, because he's gonna have 4 or 5 catches, it's fine. It's just not great. Not playing any other receiver. And the only other decision I think you're coming to is Derek Carr. Like, you're obviously playing Darren Waller if you have him. But in the 3 weeks post-Ruggs, he has 12, 19, and 10 fantasy points, talking about Derek Carr there. So I understand if you're like, okay, I need a streaming option. Dallas is going to score points. I'm going to have to throw it. But who's he throwing to, right? It's basically all short looks to Hunter Renfrow. Those aren't much upside for a quarterback. And then Waller, and it's like Waller needs to like explode for Carr to do anything. And it's not a great spot. I wouldn't personally stream Derek Carr this week, especially in Dallas. So really, for this team, you're only looking at Jacobs, the low end too, and then you're starting Darren Waller and maybe Hunter Renfrow full PPR, but honestly, no one else. For Dallas, it is going to depend on the status of CeeDee Lamb. If he is active, then you're absolutely playing him and Zeke. Those are two guys that are locked in. Schultz would also be like a solid option as like a mid to low end tight end too, since he plays really well when one of Gallup, Lamb, or Cooper are like out, and we know Cooper's going to miss this game, so we would see a lot of Schultz. He'd get a good amount of targets. He'd be a solid play. Gallup would be like an okay play, not a must start by any means, but he would have a red zone role. We're expecting them to move the ball pretty well against the Raiders. They should score points, so he's got good touchdown chances. He should have a floor of 6-7 targets. So he's like a solid play, and he's got the upside because some of his targets come deep downfield. He just becomes a much better play, obviously, if Lamb is out. And again, the last one, Cedric Wilson. If Lamb plays, it's just a deeper format play. He'll be on the field a lot, and he'll be used downfield, but the target share is going to be pretty low. And so 14, 16 team leagues, that's really all you're looking at there. If Lamb does miss the game, which is definitely a possibility, Gallup, I think, moves into like must-start territory. You're playing him at wide receiver 2. You're playing him at the flex, the second flex. So you're just finding a way to get him into your lineup. He'd be the very clear focal point in the red zone in the passing game. He'd be a focal point on third downs, deep downfield. Like his target projection would go up, his floor would go up, his ceiling would go up. He'd be a really, really strong play. Schultz would also be a great play at tight end. I'd be getting him into lineups. Then Cedric Wilson would also mix in as like a decent option. I think that he'd be best used in the flex or the second flex, but you obviously wouldn't need to start Cedric Wilson. But if you're in a 12, 14, 16 team league, probably not 8 or 10, but in those deeper formats, he's absolutely a good streaming option if Lamb misses, because he'll be on the field every play. They're going to use him downfield, and they're still going to score points, and they've still featured Cedric Wilson at times in the red zone when other guys have been healthy. So he'd be a solid play. And then you could also look at Pollard. He'd be interesting if Lamb were out, just because they would have fewer weapons in the receiving game, and it's more likely that one, they'd run the ball more, and two, they might use sets that have both Pollard and Zeke. But then they could also just use Pollard in the receiving game more, try and get him more targets. And so I think as like a low end too, you could definitely use Pollard. And I know some people are struggling with like injuries right now. He'd be totally fine to use at running back too if Lamb misses. If Lamb doesn't miss, Pollard's, still a really high upside handcuff, but probably just finishes as that. Final game on Thanksgiving will be Bills at Saints. This game has a 45.5 point total, and the Bills are 6-point road favorites. For the Bills, Josh Allen and Diggs are obvious must starts. I'd also consider Knox in that category as well. He's been great all season while healthy. And while New Orleans is not a matchup you're targeting for tight ends, it's still a difficult matchup for them. Matchup does matter far less for the tight end position, right? Even in difficult matchups, a lot can come down to, have your team even like played elite tight ends. But it also just comes down to there are so few tight ends that are like heavily involved in the offensive game plan. And when they are, you shouldn't shy away from them because of matchup, right? They're just some tight ends you're playing regardless. And I think Knox kind of falls into that category. Worth noting, had the 10 targets last week, but it did come against a tight end funnel. So it was just a defense that funneled targets in the middle of the field. And they were also trailing like the entire game. So don't look at the 10 targets and be like, oh, he's definitely going to get 10 targets again. I think it'll be good. 10 targets is, a high projection for Knox. But still, again, I view him as like a mid-range tight end one, likely means you're playing him. After those three, my interest really goes away. Neither Sanders or Beasley is seeing consistent enough volume to really be trusted. And they now run a 3 running back committee against the top 3 run defense. So that's not something I want to go to. So I don't want to go to the running backs. I don't want to go to the receivers behind Diggs. So really just start Allen, Diggs, and Knox, and I would bench everyone else. For the Saints, a lot depends on injuries. Again, Ingram and Kamara are both in danger of missing this game, though we're going to learn a lot more today after I record this. When I post this, we're going to learn their status. Kind of have to hold my like final take for when we know that, but I think that everyone kind of knows what to do here, right? Like even in a tough matchup, you're playing Kamara if he's active, and then you're not playing anyone else. Then if Kamara is out, you bump down to saying, okay, I'm playing Ingram, right? Ingram's played really well while Kamara has been out, so you're playing Ingram, not playing anyone else. Then if Kamara and Ingram are out, I think you're starting Tony Jones. He's coming off this ankle injury, so maybe they don't give him like a feature workload, but he looked really, really good in the preseason, looked really good to start the season, looks very explosive, and if he's good to go, I think he can have success in this matchup. It would just be like less interest everywhere. So Kamara's the most interest, he's out. Ingram has medium interest, he's out. Tony Jones has lower end interest, but still interest, right? Because he'd still be close to a featured back, in my opinion. And that basically covers every scenario. Again, if everyone is healthy, I don't really want to start Mark Ingram. It's going to be more Kamara, and he's not going to have enough touches in a really tough matchup. Aside from the running backs, you're likely benching everyone else. Troutman is done for the season, or effectively done for the season. He'll be done for like a month plus. Traquan Smith and Callaway are fine in deeper leagues, but the Bills have an elite pass defense as well. They're not going to succeed in this spot. You're just praying that they score a touchdown, and their touchdown chances are very low. So I bench Smith, bench Callaway, bench all the other ancillary receivers. Despite what Jonathan Taylor did, again, this is a fantastic defense. We're not targeting them for high-end fantasy scores, so it's really just see who's healthy for the running backs, and that's our decision who to start for the Saints. I would bench everyone else. So that'll do it for the Thanksgiving Day starts and sits. Again, I will do another start and sit video for the rest of the games on Saturday, so be sure to check that one out. It's going to be a very long video, so I definitely will not be able to go as in depth, but I don't know, I feel like I say that a lot and then I end up just going in depth anyways. But at any rate, that'll do it for this video. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting the like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.